Welcome to Both Sides of This Story. I'm your host, Alan Janae from CBS 4. Thank you for joining us. Our special high school debate tournament concludes tonight with this, our championship match, challenging our students and our viewers to look at important Colorado issues from both sides. Students from 4 Colorado high schools have competed in our tournament series of debates, and we're down to our top 2 students right now competing tonight to become the very first Both Sides of the Story champ. Each student will offer a case, ask and answer questions of their opponent, and offer rebuttal. We'll also feature an expert judging panel who will chime in with questions of their own. Both students have prepared a pro and a con case for tonight's debate topic, and they won't know which side they'll defend until we have a coin flip right here in our studio. Tonight's championship match features students from the Denver East High School forensics team and the Cherry Creek High School speech and debate team. So let's meet our participants. First, Andrew Ying. He is a senior at Cherry Creek High School and truly prides himself in being a team motivator. He serves on the National Honor Society board. Next, Jack Cohen. He is the head captain of East debate team and is a public forum debater. He loves skiing and hiking, and he helps run the constitutional law program for middle schoolers. Gentlemen, best of luck. We also have a special panel of experts who will offer their analysis of the debate. They are Dominic Dezzutti, host of Colorado Decides, the election debate series produced in conjunction with CBS 4. Next to him is my colleague Sean Boyd, political specialist with CBS 4, and political analyst Eric Sonderman. Both Sean and Eric are also part of our Colorado Decides debate series. Before we get started, let's learn why Andrew was drawn to the speech and debate team.
I knew that, of course, like the invasion of Iraq, but my knowledge of everything over there was pretty foggy. And but when I learned, especially in my history classes when we were discussing current events and like how many people are killed through like drone strikes and all those types of things, I really thought that this is a big issue that I am really ignoring or overlooking if I'm just at home studying math all the time. So that's why I really was excited to join debate.
Andrew's a senior this year, considering several colleges, including Stanford and Harvard. He's thinking about studying artificial intelligence and neuroeconomics. Now, we're going to hear how Jack keeps his cool during debate rounds.
I think as a debater, I'm a very critical thinker, and I also like to think on my feet and think quickly. So when someone brings a new argument that I maybe haven't heard of or maybe haven't thought of that well, instead of panicking and not knowing what to do, I think I'm really good at coming up with ways to either circumvent it or go through it without just giving up. Every time you walk into a debate, you don't know what you're going to expect. You really can't judge your opponents just on the way they look. And so you never fully know what they're going to do and what you're going to have to do in the round. But it's also really exciting because it's such a fun experience. And it's such a fun thing to be able to take a set of arguments and really try to poke holes in them or think about your own stuff and connect it to the bigger picture in life, things like that.
Jack's also a senior. He's looking at attending Puget Sound or Berkeley or Colorado College, and he's thinking of studying political science. All right, time to set the ground rules tonight. Each side will present their case, ask each other questions, and have a chance to offer rebuttals. When it's all finished, we'll go to our illustrious panel for their own questions and find out whom they felt offered the best arguments. So let's get started. The issue up for debate is whether Colorado should raise the minimum wage to $12 an hour by 2020. Let's have our coin flip. So, Jack, I'm going to bring you out and allow you to call it tonight. Heads or tails?
Tails.
And tails it is. What would you like?
I'll take the affirmative today.
You'll take the affirmative. And that means Andrew takes the negative, pro and con. And so that means that first, Jack, you speak for 3 minutes. The round is yours right now. Go ahead.
Thank you. I affirm today's resolution. The minimum wage in Colorado should be raised to $12 an hour by 2020. My first point is that raising the minimum wage puts money in Colorado families' pockets. Quote, in no Colorado county can a family of any shape or size make ends meet on minimum wage, says Aubrey Hasvald, a family economic security program associate at the Colorado Center for Law and Policy. We need to raise the minimum wage in order to support families, and doing so will also have massive economic benefits. The Economic Policy Institute stated that a minimum wage increase from the current rate to just $10.10 would inject more than $22 billion net into the economy. Specifically in Colorado, a recent study conducted by the University of Denver found that lifting Colorado's minimum wage from $8.31 an hour to $12 an hour would pump $400 million into the state's economy. Additionally, they specify that this would come with minimal impacts on wage inflation or total employment. In fact, Chris Stifler, an economist with the Colorado Fiscal Institute, found that the last time Colorado implemented a significant minimum wage hike, 71,000 more jobs were added to the economy. The Denver Post reports that about 400,000 Colorado households will see higher incomes, half of those being families with children, if we raise the minimum wage. Raising the minimum wage to $12 per hour will add $400 million to the economy, will massively increase jobs, and could help more than 400,000 families in Colorado. My second point is that raising the minimum wage would combat inflation. The minimum wage has not kept up with general monetary inflation. This means that as the years go by, money has less and less purchasing power, but wages are not keeping up. This means that families who are making the minimum wage are often unable to support themselves. Raising the wage to $12 would effectively match inflation and ensure that workers could adopt a satisfactory standard of living. The U.S. Department of Labor shows that the minimum wage in 1968 was $1.60, which is equivalent to $11.16 in January 2016 dollars, which is 54% higher than today's federal minimum wage. Liana Fox, a PhD and senior analyst at the Economic Policy Institute, emphasizes that inflation indexing guarantees low-wage workers a wage that keeps pace with the rising costs of goods and services. Raising the minimum wage guarantees that workers receive a living wage that is beneficial. Raising the minimum wage would put money in the pockets of Colorado families and ensure that workers make enough to support themselves. For these reasons, I affirm. Thank you.
Jack, thank you very much. And now, Andrew, you have 2 minutes for any questions and cross-examination. Go right ahead.
Jack, my first question for you is how many people stand to benefit from a $12 minimum wage?
Well, currently, there are about 3% of the Colorado working population is working at minimum wage. However, the Economic Policy Institute explains that when we increase the minimum wage, it can create ripple effects that lead to higher wages for a lot of other people, not just those who are living under the minimum wage.
So explain that for me. How come if we raise the minimum wage to $12, then the other people, besides those 3%, will also receive higher wages?
Well, there are a couple different things in that, because first, some people have contract stipulations that allow them to be making a certain amount above the minimum wage, which means that their wages inherently increase. But then the Economic Policy Institute explains that the other reason is simply because as you start to pay everybody more, wages just generally increase.
Okay. For sure. And then for my second question for you is, as I've driven across the state, I've noticed that fast food restaurants in downtown Denver, for example, have a higher hiring wage than compared to other places, smaller towns across Colorado. By simple supply and demand, they can't get people to work at $8 or $9, so they hire at 10 or 11. Sure. My question for you is, why doesn't this simple supply and demand and natural market structures fix what you're trying to outline in your case?
Because, as you talked about, these people living in rural areas are still being paid $8 an hour. And the card that I read explains that they can't support a family on that minimum wage. So we need to ensure that every person gets those $12 an hour in order to actually support their family and earn a living wage.
How do you think that increasing the minimum wage, what kind of effect would that have on unemployment?
It actually won't decrease unemployment. The study that I read from you from the University of Denver specifically explained that it would pump almost $400 million into the state economy at almost no impact to employment.
Hang on. $400 million in the economy is not the same as employment.
No, I know.
Explain to me why the employment won't change, especially if you're saying that not only the 3% will receive more wages, but everyone else will as well.
Of course, yeah. The operative part of that study that I was just trying to cite was that they specifically explained that it would have an almost negligible impact on employment. So, like, we might lose a few jobs, but in the long term, it's incredibly beneficial.
How much is a few?
The study doesn't specifically say, but what it says is that it says two things. First, it says that there are almost no impact on employment, but second, it says that that impact on employment will be massively outweighed by the economic benefits that we see coming from this.
That number is going to lead into my case.
All right, the issue up for debate today, again, is whether Colorado should raise the minimum wage to $12 an hour by 2020. Andrew, the floor is now yours for 3 minutes to state your side, the negative.
Thank you. The minimum wage in Colorado should not be raised to $12 an hour by 2020. I begin by observing that under the 2006 Colorado Minimum Wage Increase Initiative, or Amendment 42, Colorado's minimum wage already adjusts each year for the Consumer Price Index, or the cost of living in Colorado. Which brings me to my main argument in today's debate, which is that raising the minimum wage when it's already annually re-indexed would have drastic inadvertent consequences for Colorado workers and the economy. According to a poll of dozens of family farms across the state of Colorado, the $12 minimum wage would result in them not even being able to break even. For small businesses currently making a 2 to 3% profit, a $12 minimum wage could be fatal by eviscerating already small margins of profit. Family farms in Delta should not be held to the same standard as Fortune 500 companies in Denver. But the negative impacts aren't just limited to family farms. When hundreds of restaurants across the state were polled on Amendment 70, 72% said that they would have to lay off workers. Dr. Eric Fruits, chief economist at Economics International Corporation, warns that once fully phased in, the minimum wage hikes under Amendment 70 would reduce Colorado employment by as much as 90,000 people. Teen employment would be reduced by as much as 10,500, with the end result being a net decrease in Colorado wage and salary incomes by as much as $3.9 billion a year. Undoubtedly, the income benefits from a $12 minimum wage would be offset by the lost wages from reductions in employment. The impact is increased poverty. Dr. Fruits observes that because poverty is clearly and directly linked to unemployment, any state policies that increase unemployment, such as steep increases in the minimum wage, and Jack's proposing a 44% increase, is almost sure to increase poverty. On a global level, the United Nations has explicitly identified employment as central to poverty eradication. Now, let's consider the main argument from proponents of raising the minimum wage. That's impossible for families to meet their own basic needs under the current minimum wage. This statistic is distorted. The average family income for minimum wage workers is almost equal to the state average of $63,000 for a family with people working with wages under $12, and 2/3 of these workers work part-time. Now, let me be very clear. I support raising wages if it's done right. In fact, emotionally, we all in some way or form would like to see wages increased. But raising the wage this far and forcing it on small corporations as well as big corporations in some idealistic one-size-fits-all solution will actually harm the workers we're trying to help. Remember the numbers. By the time a wage hike is completed, we will lose 90,000 jobs and a decrease in income of $3.9 billion. Because Colorado shouldn't do the wrong thing for the right reasons, I'm proud to negate the resolution.
Andrew, thank you very much. Jack, your 2 minutes for questions and cross-examination begins now. Go ahead.
Awesome. So the Bell Policy Institute explained just last year that currently the minimum wage is not keeping up with the Colorado Index of Living Standards. So how does your first point make sense that they're trying to adjust when the minimum wage isn't keeping up?
Hang on. The provision in Amendment 42 says that each year in January, the Colorado Department or the Economics has to revise the minimum wage to a point where it keeps up with CPI or Consumer Price Index.
So are you arguing that every family in Colorado right now who is making the minimum wage is fully supported under that minimum wage?
No, but what I am arguing, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, is that families with people working under $12 an hour in Colorado earn on average $61,000 a year. That's families, not just one person, but families.
Wait. But that's a pretty big difference between working under $12 an hour and making the minimum wage, right? Are you arguing that all of those families are making the minimum wage?
I'm saying that families that even if they earn under $12 an hour, the average for their entire family and not just the worker themselves is $61,000.
The problem is that those aren't the families who are making just the minimum wage. They're making somewhere between $8 and $12 an hour, right?
And their family average income is $61,000.
Okay, so you're not looking at families who are making minimum wage. You're looking at families.
I'm looking at families who are making under and at the minimum wage. And the average there is $61,000.
Okay.
I'm not looking above.
Sure. So moving on to your second point, where you talk about unemployment, I explained to you the piece of evidence that said that previously when Colorado has raised the minimum wage, we've actually seen increases of jobs of 71,000 jobs. So doesn't that mean that we're actually going to be making more because we're looking at historical data?
You know, that's a good question, Jack. And I want to tell Colorado today that just because Colorado gained 71,000, in 2006, that's when ballot 42 or Amendment 42 went into place. That was the last year before we entered the recession, or one of the last years. And of course, in a year of growth, we're supposed to gain jobs. The problem is when Amendment 42 came into place, the number of jobs that we were projected to have was greater than 71,000. We actually lost jobs. Just because we gained 71,000 doesn't mean it was a good year for us. And that's something that a lot of people with your position are spinning, but it's actually not very accurate.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to wrap up the questions right now. Now, Jack, you have 2 minutes for a rebuttal. Our question today, again, is should Colorado raise the minimum wage to $12 an hour by 2020? Jack, go ahead.
Awesome, thank you very much. So let's talk about my opponent's case. First, he talks about how we're already going to be adjusting for the standard of living under the minimum wage. But there are two problems with this. Because first, the Bell Policy Institute explains that specifically in Colorado, the $8.31 minimum wage is not keeping up with the money that is required to have an adequate standard of life. But second, it's important to remember the evidence that I read you in my case, which explains that we're going to need a minimum wage of at least $11.16 to even match federal inflation. At that point, where our wage is still falling behind that, it means we're not matching inflation, which means that Colorado families are still struggling. But then let's move on to talk about his inadvertent consequences points. First, he talks about how 12 families from farms can't break even. It's important to remember that the Denver Post explains that when looking at the state holistically, more than 60% of small businesses support raising the minimum wage. They do so because it explains that it makes workers more productive and it reduces employee turnover, which means that they can reduce significant costs when it comes to training and other increment costs from hiring more workers. This is important because it means that when we're looking at holistically, not just at a very, very small section of the population, small workers are benefiting. But then let's talk about unemployment. It's important to remember that the last time Colorado had wage hikes, we saw 71,000 more jobs created. He's going to try to get up and tell you that this was actually a decrease from what it was. But the study that I cite from the University of Denver specifically looks at what happened when we increased the minimum wage, and it's a direct causal effect. Additionally, remember the fact that just because he says that we're in a recession isn't necessarily a reason that anything is going to change. But then, finally, he talks about how Colorado families are okay under the minimum wage. This is a really important point because it's important to remember that he's not talking about families who are subsisting under the minimum wage. He's talking about families who are making above $61,000 a year, which is a significant difference. When we're looking at studies of whether or not families can actually have a higher standard of living under the minimum wage, we should be looking at what happens when families have the minimum wage. Then, the self-sufficiency study in Colorado specifically explains that families cannot support themselves under the minimum wage. Thank you.
Jack, thank you very much. Jack with the affirmative, Andrew with the negative. This is the championship round of both sides of the story. Andrew, you now have 3 minutes to respond and close.
Don't do the wrong thing for the right reasons. Jack has good intentions in proposing an increase in the minimum wage, but his proposal and Amendment 70 as a whole is the wrong way to raise the wage because it believes in a one-size-fits-all solution that will result in an increase in unemployment by 90,000 people and a decrease in net salary income by $3.9 billion. That's 90,000 people who now were earning minimum wage but now have no wage at all. So because unemployment is closely correlated to poverty, that means I access my impact of increasing poverty levels in Colorado, especially for people in rural areas who need that money the most. So when you're making your decision in today's debate, we must first look at small businesses. Harvard professor John Rawls said it best when he asserted that the most just policies are those that benefit the most disadvantaged members of society. We cannot ask these family farms to raise their wages by 44% as Jack proposes. These small farms are already living off thin 2 to 3% margins, and raising the minimum wage by such a number would push many of them into poverty. Jack talks about how this is just family farms are a subsection of the entire Colorado population, but I would argue that we need to focus on them because they are the ones most affected by minimum wage. It's not people working in the Fortune 500 companies that this would affect. It would most affect people who are struggling day to day to make ends meet and are living off these 2 to 3% profit margins that would be eviscerated by Jack's proposal. Now, remember, family farms in Delta should not be held to the same standard as Fortune 500 companies in Denver. Now, let's start and take a look at Jack's case. He talks about inflation and how the minimum wage is not keeping up. My response to this is that Amendment 42 already provides every January, Colorado adjusts their minimum wage to keep up with CPI. But even if you don't believe that, my response to that is that 90,000 people will lose their jobs and have no more wage after that. So that means that it doesn't matter if it keeps up with inflation. They'll be earning nothing per hour because they'll be laid off through their jobs. Next, let's talk about how they can't meet ends meet in poverty. For the average, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, for a family with a person making less than $12 an hour, is that their family income is $61,000 a year. That's 3 times the federal poverty level in 2016 for a family of 3. So clearly, the people in Colorado who are working minimum wage have other members of their family who are also doing work, and their family average income is $61,000. Now, let's talk about, we need to remember at the end of this debate that we can't be won over by Jack's emotional appeals in his final speech. Emotionally, we all want to raise the wages. I'm not contesting that. But the problem with Jack's proposal is it will push more people into poverty because it's the wrong way to raise the wage. The two numbers you need to remember are 90,000 and 6.9 billion. That's how many people will lose their jobs and how much net salary revenue will be lost. Because we cannot do the wrong thing for the right reasons. I am proud to negate in today's resolution.
Andrew Ying, thank you very much with the negative side. Jack, now in the affirmative, your 1 minute close. Jack Cohen.
Thank you. First, let's talk about small businesses. Remember the Denver Post, who explains that 60% of Colorado small businesses support raising the minimum wage because it decreases turnover and it increases productivity. This also means that employment doesn't drop as much as he tries to say it does because first, remember that historically, when Colorado has raised minimum wages, we've seen massive increases in employment. But second, when businesses are more efficient and when they have less turnover, it means that employees are better off, which means that this employment benefit that he's talking about just doesn't ever materialize. But then, let's talk about inflation, which is really important. He tells you that Amendment 42 is adjusting, but the Bell Policy Institute and the Self-Sufficiency Survey for Colorado specifically explain that this isn't working right now, and Colorado families are falling behind. They say that the only way to do this is to switch to this $12 minimum wage, which is what we should do. But then, let's move on to look at the economy. He tries to tell you that we should ignore my emotional appeals, but he ignores my numbers throughout every speech in his round. First, remember that this pumps $40 million or $400 million into the Colorado economy directly, which is an incredible benefit, and will also move to help these family farms that he say are so important. But then, remember that we can create upwards of 71,000 jobs because we've already seen that historically happen. Thank you.
Jack, thank you very much. Andrew Ying, Jack Cohen, Andrew of Cherry Creek, Jack of East High School. A very spirited championship round of our debate. Definitely worthy of a championship match. Let's go now to our panel of experts and get their thoughts on what they saw. Dominic, take it away.
Alan, before this started, we were talking about looking very forward to this title fight, and it did not disappoint. Gentlemen, you both did a great job. Let's get a few questions in from the panel for each of our debaters. Start us off.
Who are we asking first?
We're going to start with Jack.
So, Jack, how has this worked in other places that have raised the minimum wage? I'm thinking of Washington, D.C., for example, Seattle, places like that.
It's actually been really effective. The Denver Post study the University of Denver study that I looked at also looked at other places and found that there have been very negligible decreases in jobs from those places, increasing the minimum wage also.
So they have lost jobs?
It's been almost no losses in jobs, and they haven't actually impacted overall unemployment rates at all.
Eric, a question for Jack?
Two-part question, Jack.
Yeah.
First, why do we have a minimum wage at all? Why doesn't just the free marketplace figure this out? Second, if I can just go to that part, if we're going to have a minimum wage, why $12? You can't support a family. That's not a survival wage. Why isn't it $25 or $50? What's the magic of 12?
Well, so to answer your first part of the question, I believe that we have a minimum wage to ensure that every working family can earn a living wage and support themselves and their family, because without that, we could see a lot of people who just can't support themselves at all, no matter how hard they try to work. It also protects people who haven't received the same education opportunities and things like that, which overall helps the economy. But then on your second part of the question, I think $12 is the magic number because first, it matches the current inflation that we're seeing in terms of money. When I talked about how we've had minimum wages in the past, and now in order to retain a living wage, you need about $11.50. That goes up to $12, which ensures that families can be successful. But then the Bell Policy Institute explains that $12 is really effective because it means that specifically in Colorado, families will be able to support themselves.
Let's get a couple quick questions in for Andrew. Sean?
So, Andrew, how do you explain this 60% of small businesses in Colorado who pay more than the minimum wage and actually support this measure?
I would argue that 60% actually isn't as good of a number as we make it out to be, because 40% no, and this is a lot of these family farms and these smaller businesses in rural Colorado are making only 2 to 3% profit margins, and when you increase that by 44%, and this is what makes what Jack is proposing so different. It's a 44% increase. He can talk about 2006 all he wants, but that was a more modest measure compared to this 44% increase.
Eric?
I understand, Andrew, your opposition to this proposition. Do you have a solution? There's a growing wage gap in this country between haves and have-nots. If this is not the answer, what do you suggest?
For sure. So I actually support raising the wage, but I don't support a one-size-fits-all solution. Jack's solution could be very good, and I support raising it to $12 if we open exceptions for small family farms and workers with under 50 workers. This is what Washington, D.C. and places like Seattle have done. But under Amendment 70, it believes in a one-size-fits-all solution that hurts family farms and results in 90,000 people being out of jobs and $6.9 billion total in revenue being gone out the window.
Alan, as you can see even from the answers from our questions, it's gonna be tough. Give us a couple of seconds.
Yeah, championship round, championship answers to the questions too. I can see that. I'm going to give you a moment. Panel gets a moment to consider whom they felt won this debate, and that gives me a moment to let you know while this is our championship, all of our debates from this session and this season are available online, and they're all good. All of our students did a fantastic job, so be sure and check them out at cpt12.org. All right, panel, do we have a champion?
Begrudgingly, and fellas, I'm telling you for the exact truth, I actually have a note here from the panel earlier in the debate saying, do we have to pick a winner? Because we really wanted to just say you both won, but that's not the spirit of this. At the end of it, in a very close decision, we felt Andrew offered the better argumentation. Both of these campaigns would do very well to have either one of you arguing for them. You did a fantastic job, and congratulations, Andrew and Jack. Both did a fantastic job in this debate.
Really awesome. Just fantastic. Andrew, congratulations. You are the very first both sides of the story champion now. It's quite an honor. You both gave our viewers a wonderful debate tonight. Both of you ought to be very proud of the work you did for Cherry Creek and for East. And that's all we have time for in our program tonight. I want to thank all of our excellent students for accepting our challenge and participating in our debates. Those students, Monroe Rausch, Tristan Kemp-Laguerre from George Washington, Colton Barda and Cole Rickey from St. Mary's High School, Andrew Ying and Will Herbst from Cherry Creek, and Jack Cohen and Max Donovan from East High School. I also want to thank our panel members for sharing their thoughts. And finally, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. It has been a pleasure. It's the support of viewers like you and our sponsors that helps make this all a reality. We'll be back on election night with live coverage from the CBS 4 team right here on Colorado Public Television Channel 12 and Tuesday starting at 7 p.m. And you can catch me every morning on CBS 4 for all the latest news and information about this year's election and issues. For everyone here at Colorado Public Television, I'm Alan Janae, and that is Both Sides of the Story.